Well, I think the best place to start to understand what distraction is to understand what distraction is not.
Okay.
So if you ask most people what is the opposite of distraction, they'll tell you it's focus. But that's not actually true. That's not exactly right. That the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. That if you look at the origin of both words, they both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. So, and you'll also notice that both words, traction and distraction, come from end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you say you're going to do, pulls you towards your values, helps you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The
Mm-hmm.
opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything
From
that is
your
not
values.
aligned with your
Yeah.
values. Exactly, anything that pulls you away from what you plan to do with your time, and pulls you away from the person you want to become. So this is really important. This is a really important place to start, because I think what most people don't realize is that any action can be traction or distraction. That there is no hierarchy in saying, oh, this is kind of, this is morally superior, this is okay, but oh, that's always bad, that's always frivolous. No, that's silly. And I think you hear a lot of commentators these days saying, oh, social media, that's rotting your brain, and video games, that's bad for you, and stop checking email so much. And I think that's silly, because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't account for the reality that many of us need these tools for our livelihood, for connecting with others. There's nothing wrong with the technology per se. It's to what extent we are using it and how we are using it.
Mm-hmm.
So anything can become an act of traction. If you want to plan ahead and say, look, I want to be on social media, I want to spend time watching Netflix, I want to take a walk in the park and meditate, or whatever it is, it's fine as long as it's done on your schedule, not somebody else's. So anything can be an act of traction. We shouldn't vilify, video games, that's bad, but
Yeah.
watching football is good. I mean, it's silly. Anything you plan to do with your time, as long as it's planned with intent, is fine. Now, what people think about when they think about distraction, they think about, the frivolities. They think about, oh, I was checking email when I should have been working, or whatever. And I think that is actually the more pernicious form of distraction, is the distraction that you don't realize is a distraction. So just like anything can be an act of traction if you plan for it, anything that is not what you plan to do is by definition a distraction. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you sit down at your desk and you say, okay, I'm going to work on that big project. I'm not going to get distracted. Nothing's going to get in my way. I have to finish this thing that I've been procrastinating on. And then as soon as you start thinking, oh, you know what? Let me do that one thing on my to-do list real quick,
Yeah.
right? Let
Or
me
I'm
do
gonna
that
check
easy
my
thing.
email.
Yeah, let me just check my email. Let me just look at that Slack channel real quick. We fool ourselves by saying, oh, well, that's a work-related
It's
task,
work.
right? I'm being
Yeah.
productive. But if that's not what you plan to do with your time, it is a distraction. And in fact, that's the much more dangerous form of distraction, because if you're playing a video game at your desk at work, well, okay, obviously you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. But if you're checking email or a Slack channel instead of working on that big project, you are just as much as distracted. But
Yeah.
you don't realize you're getting distracted because you've allowed distraction to trick you into prioritizing the urgent and the easy at the expense of the important. And so that's the much more dangerous form of distraction. So now that we have traction and
Yeah.
distraction, we need to ask what prompts us to traction or distraction,
Mhm.
right? Remember, both words end in the word action. So what
Yeah.
sends us down these paths? We have two kinds of triggers. We have external triggers. External triggers are what most people think about when they think about distraction. It's the pings, the dings, the rings, all of these things in our outside environment that can lead us towards traction or distraction. Great, we know all about those, and I can tell you ways to hack back those external triggers in a minute. But what turns out to be the much more common source of distraction, the number one source of distraction, is not what is happening outside of us, but rather what we find is that distraction begins from within. That if you look at what distracts people throughout their day, it's not things outside of them, it's what's going on in their heads. It's
Mhm.
boredom, loneliness, fatigue, anxiety, uncertainty. It's these feelings that we seek to escape from.